Evelyn Carter had always been the kind of person who noticed things long before anyone else did. In a small ranching town where most people followed routines passed down for generations, she stood out as someone who paid attention to the small changes that others overlooked. She wasn't loud, she wasn't pushy, and she wasn't the type to create unnecessary worry. She simply watched, listened, and understood the land around her. It was something she had done since childhood, spending hours walking through open fields, feeling the texture of the soil under her boots, and paying attention to the wind, the temperature, and even the behavior of animals. The land spoke to her in its own quiet way, and over time she learned how to hear it. Luke Dawson, on the other hand, was known for the opposite quality. He was confident, strong-willed, and deeply rooted in tradition. His ranch had been in his family for 3 generations, and he carried the weight of that legacy with pride. He trusted his experience, his instincts, and his long record of success. People in town respected him not because he demanded it, but because he earned it through years of hard work. He woke before sunrise, worked until dark, and rarely complained. To him, the land wasn't something mysterious or unpredictable. It was something he had managed and understood his entire life. The two of them could not have been more different, but they lived only a few miles apart. Their paths crossed occasionally at the local supply store or the weekly farmer's market. Luke always greeted her politely but never spent much time talking. Evelyn never took this personally. She knew people like Luke preferred to keep their circles small, yet she also knew that sometimes people like him were the hardest to warn when something felt wrong. It all began in early spring, when the ground was waking up from the winter cold. The town was moving at a slower pace than usual, waiting for the new season to settle fully. Evelyn liked this time of year because it gave her more chances to walk the outer trails of her property. During one of these walks, she noticed something unusual near the border between her land and Luke's western pasture. The soil felt warmer than normal in certain patches, almost like it was holding heat from inside the earth rather than from the sunlight above. She knelt down, touched the ground, and pressed her palm against the surface. The temperature difference was slight, but she knew it wasn't natural. A few steps farther, she found cracks in the soil, thin, uneven lines branching out like a fragile web. They weren't large or alarming on their own, but they didn't belong in that part of the field. The ground there had always been firm and steady. She looked around, observing the way the grass grew in uneven patterns, the way a few small rocks had shifted from their usual positions, and how even the wind felt different near the cracked area. Something was changing, and she could sense it. Later that week, she passed by Luke's ranch and saw him preparing his western pasture for a new expansion. He planned to open more grazing space for his growing herd. Evelyn paused at the fence for a moment, watching him work with the same quiet diligence he was known for. He seemed focused, measuring distances and marking the ground with confidence. She hesitated, unsure whether she should say anything. Luke was a good man, but he didn't like being told what to do, especially not by someone who wasn't involved in his ranching decisions. Still, Evelyn's intuition didn't let her stay silent. She waited until he noticed her presence. Luke looked up, brushed dust off his hands, and walked toward the fence. "Morning, Evelyn," he said, his tone friendly but busy. "Something I can help you with?" "Something I can help you with." She took a slow breath. "Luke, I wanted to talk to you about the ground near the western edge. I was walking there a few days ago and noticed some strange signs. The soil is warmer than usual, and there are cracks forming. I'm not sure what it means, but it doesn't look stable." Luke listened, but his expression remained unchanged. He nodded politely, but she could tell he didn't think much of her concern. "The ground shifts a little every year," he replied. "Winter frost, spring thaw, it happens. I've been working this land for a long time, nothing out of the ordinary." Evelyn kept her voice calm. "I know the seasonal changes." This felt different. Luke appreciated her sincerity, but he didn't see any real issue. His ranch had been reliable for decades. He had never dealt with major land changes before, and he didn't believe anything unusual was happening now. "I'll keep an eye on it," he said kindly, but with finality. "But I've got plans for this pasture." It's the perfect spot for expansion. She didn't push further. She simply nodded, wished him a good day, and continued her walk. Luke went back to his work, but for a brief moment, he watched her leave with a small trace of uncertainty. It vanished quickly, replaced by his usual confidence. Over the next several days, Evelyn continued observing the area. The cracks grew slightly wider, and some of the soil began to dip in shallow curves, as if the ground was sinking in slow motion. Small animals avoided the space, choosing to walk around it instead of across it. Birds circled differently overhead, staying higher than usual. Evelyn noted every detail in a small journal she kept for her land observations. She rarely shared these notes with anyone, but they helped her understand patterns and changes. One morning, she noticed something else. The ground produced a dull, hollow sound when she lightly tapped it with her boot. That was new, and it made her uneasy. The land under her feet had always felt solid, almost comforting, but now it felt like something was missing underneath. She closed her eyes and tried to listen to the silent signals of the earth. It didn't speak in words, of course, but it conveyed a sense of emptiness beneath the surface. By now, Evelyn felt strongly that Luke needed to hear her concerns again, even if he didn't fully believe her. She walked to his ranch later that afternoon. Luke was repairing a section of fencing and greeted her with a curious glance. "Back again?" he asked lightly. She nodded. "I've noticed more changes. The ground is sinking in a few places. It doesn't feel safe." Luke leaned on the fence, studying her expression. He admired her honesty, but he also believed she was worrying unnecessarily. He had never known the land to behave in such unpredictable ways. To him, her observations were interesting but not concerning. "I appreciate you telling me," he said. "But I checked the soil myself. It's a bit uneven." "Sure. But nothing dangerous." Evelyn could tell he wasn't convinced. She didn't want to argue, so she simply said, "Just be careful, Luke. The land is different this time." When she left, Luke shook his head gently, not unkindly but firmly. He trusted his years of experience, and one unusual patch of ground wasn't enough to change his plans. The townspeople eventually heard about Evelyn's warnings, but they treated it mostly as an amusing difference of opinion. Luke had been ranching his whole life. Evelyn was simply observant by nature. People assumed it would all settle on its own. No one expected anything unusual to happen, but Evelyn felt a weight in her chest, a quiet worry that wouldn't leave. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she knew the land was trying to tell her something. And even though Luke didn't believe her yet, the ground beneath his ranch was already changing more quickly than either of them realized. Luke Dawson prided himself on being a man who finished what he started. Once he set his mind on something, he rarely changed direction. The expansion of his western pasture had been in planning for months, and now that the weather was warming, he saw no reason to delay it any further. He wanted more space for his growing herd, and the western land seemed perfect, open, quiet, and untouched for years. From his point of view, it was the smartest step forward for his ranch. He had already ordered new fencing materials and spoken with a few local workers who helped him during busy seasons. They were scheduled to start within the week. Luke felt excited, in his calm and steady way, knowing that the expansion would allow his ranch to move into a new chapter. He had always believed that growth came from taking action, not waiting around. Still, Evelyn's words lingered faintly in the back of his mind, like a quiet echo he didn't want to think about. He wasn't someone who ignored warnings on purpose. He simply trusted what he knew. And what he knew was that the land had been dependable for generations. His father had worked that same pasture, and so had his grandfather. Nothing unusual had ever happened there. Why would this year be any different? A few days after their last conversation, Luke walked the western edge himself. He crouched down, ran his fingers through the soil, and studied the faint cracks. Yes, they were there. And yes, the ground seemed slightly uneven in certain spots. But to him, it looked no different from the natural shifts that happened every spring after the frost left the earth. He pressed his boot down firmly in several places, testing the soil. It held his weight without issue. Nothing wrong with this land, he murmured to himself. Evelyn worries too much. On the morning the workers arrived, the sky was clear and bright. Luke welcomed them with his usual friendly firmness. They knew the plan well. Straighten the fence line. Dig deeper posts for stability. Clear a few areas where thick grass had overgrown, and open the western field to connect with the main grazing area. As they began working, Luke walked the site with confidence. He explained the layout, pointed out where he wanted the posts, and reminded everyone to take their time and work carefully. The workers trusted him. After all, Luke had managed his ranch successfully for years. He wasn't the type to take unnecessary risks, and they respected that. Meanwhile, Evelyn watched the activity from a distance that first day. She didn't want to interfere or create tension, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The ground still held that strange warmth and hollow sound she had noticed before. She hoped Luke had at least taken her words into consideration, but seeing the workers dig into the soil made her uneasy. Later that afternoon, she gathered the courage to stop by again. Luke was busy checking measurements when he saw her approach. He paused and set down his tools, wiping his hands on a cloth tied to his belt. "Evelyn," he greeted politely, though his voice carried a hint of fatigue. "Everything all right?" She stood by the fence, trying to choose her words carefully. "I wanted to check in. I see the work has started." "It has," Luke replied. "We're making good progress." She nodded slowly, her eyes drifting to the fresh holes the workers were digging. She could feel something unsettled in the air, almost like the land itself was uneasy. "Luke," she said softly, "I'm not saying this to interfere. I just don't want anything unexpected to happen. The ground feels unstable in that whole area. I've never seen it behave like that." Luke listened, but his expression remained firm. He respected Evelyn's concern, but he still believed she was reading too much into it. "I checked the ground myself," he said calmly. "I didn't find anything concerning. It's just a few cracks. It's normal in early spring. And the warmth?" She pressed gently. "The sun's been strong this week," he replied. "And the hollow sound? Soil shifts can cause that. It'll settle." He didn't speak unkindly. In fact, he made an effort to remain patient. But his tone made it clear he wasn't going to stop his project. Evelyn lowered her gaze. She didn't want to argue. She simply wished she could make him understand what she felt so strongly. But warnings without proof rarely changed people's minds, especially those as experienced as Luke. "Please just be careful," she said quietly. Luke nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "I will, I promise." She appreciated his attempt at comfort, but it didn't ease her worry. She turned and walked away, hoping she was wrong about everything. As the days passed, the work continued steadily. The workers dug deeper posts near the western edge, following Luke's instructions. The ground felt slightly softer there, but not enough to concern anyone unfamiliar with the land's usual texture. The men joked lightly between themselves, discussing the weather, their families, and upcoming town events. None of them noticed the subtle dips forming in the soil or the quiet shifts just beneath their feet. Luke noticed one or two areas where the soil seemed looser, but he simply directed the workers to pack the posts tighter or dig a bit to the left. Small adjustments, in his mind, were part of any project. Nothing seemed extreme. The cattle, however, behaved differently. A few wandered near the western edge out of curiosity, but many avoided it altogether. They preferred grazing closer to the main pasture, leaving the open area surprisingly empty. Luke assumed they were simply adjusting to the recent human activity. Animals didn't like loud noises or sudden changes. He didn't think much of it. One evening, after the workers had gone home, Luke remained behind to check the progress. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the field. The air felt cooler, but the ground still held a faint warmth underneath. He crouched near one of the newly dug holes and pushed some dirt aside with his hand. The soil crumbled in an unusual way, fine in some spots, coarse in others. He frowned slightly. It wasn't enough to concern him, but he made a mental note to refill that area more carefully the next day. As he stood up, he sensed a soft vibration beneath his boots. It was so gentle he almost wondered if he had imagined it. It felt like the faint hum of a passing truck. Except the road was far from the pasture. Luke stood still for a few seconds, waiting to see if it would happen again, but nothing did. The ground was silent. He brushed it off, convincing himself it was the natural settling of soil after a long workday. The next morning, Evelyn returned to the field's edge. She tried not to intrude, but she felt the need to observe from afar. Her unease had grown stronger overnight. She had dreamed of shifting earth and hollow spaces beneath quiet land. It wasn't a frightening dream, but it was persistent and clear. She watched as Luke and the workers hammered posts, cleared thick patches of grass, and prepared new wire fencing. Everything looked efficient and orderly, but she couldn't shake the sense that the land was restless. A few townspeople drove by throughout the day, curious about Luke's expansion. Many of them admired his dedication. Some even stopped to chat with him for a few minutes, praising the improvement and sharing stories of their own ranch work. Most didn't even notice Evelyn standing at a distance, observing the ground more than the project itself. To everyone else, this was just another ranching upgrade. But to Evelyn, it felt like a quiet warning was growing stronger each day. The tension between Luke's confidence and Evelyn's intuition grew silently in the spaces between their conversations. Neither intended to challenge the other. They simply lived by different understandings of the land. Luke trusting experience, Evelyn trusting the earth's quiet signals. Luke believed everything was under control. Evelyn believed something hidden was waiting to reveal itself. And with each new fence post going into the ground, the unseen truth beneath the pasture crept a little closer to the surface. As days passed, the uneasy feeling around the western pasture grew stronger. Even though most people in town didn't notice, life continued as usual. The morning routines stayed the same. Ranchers led their cattle out at sunrise, children rode their bikes along dusty roads on their way to school, and the small shops on Main Street opened their doors with familiar smiles. On the surface, everything felt peaceful, but underneath Luke's land, something quiet and hidden had begun to change, and slowly, those changes found ways to reveal themselves. It started with sounds soft, distant, and almost impossible to notice unless someone paid close attention. Late at night, when the town rested and the world around them fell silent, a faint rumble traveled through the western edge of the ranch. It wasn't loud enough to wake anyone, but it was steady enough to be real. The noise was like a low breath in the earth, deep and slow, as if something was shifting far below the surface. One evening, Luke stepped outside after finishing dinner. He often liked to walk the ranch before bed, checking the fences and making sure his cattle were comfortable for the night. He walked with calm confidence, holding a small lantern for light. The sky above him sparkled with stars, and a soft breeze brushed against his face. As he reached the western pasture, he paused. He felt something different. The air felt thick, not unpleasant but unusual, as if it carried a quiet message he couldn't quite understand. He stood still, focusing his hearing, and that was when he sensed it, a faint, distant sound beneath his boots. It wasn't threatening or alarming, it simply felt out of place. He waited a moment longer, but the sound disappeared. He shook his head lightly, deciding it must have been his imagination, or the normal settling of soil. After a day of work, he turned around and continued his walk back home, unaware that the ground had whispered the first sign of a deeper problem. The animals, however, noticed more than Luke did. Cattle that usually wandered comfortably across the field began avoiding the western border. They would walk near it, pause, lower their heads, sniff the air, and then slowly turn away. Even the horses seemed uneasy, lifting their ears whenever they were brought near the area. Their behavior didn't look dramatic, just gentle hesitation, but it was enough to show that the land was sending signals. Evelyn saw this subtle change almost immediately. She passed by Luke's ranch one morning and noticed a group of cattle standing toward the far end of the main pasture. Not one of them moved closer to the new fencing the workers had installed. She watched them for several minutes, observing how they shifted their weight nervously and scratched the ground with their hooves without moving forward. She wasn't surprised. Animals often sensed things long before humans did. Later that afternoon, she walked back to her own property, thinking carefully. The cracks in the soil had grown slightly wider, forming delicate lines that made the ground look tired. When she pressed her boot into the earth, it sank more than usual. The grass, once firm and tall, bent too easily under her weight. Everything pointed to one unsettling truth: the ground was changing from the inside out. Evelyn knew she had to understand more. So she decided to spend some time researching. She began by pulling out old records she kept in her small wooden study. She had maps, notes, weather logs, soil readings, and articles about the area's history. She read through them slowly, looking for anything unusual or any mention of underground pockets, natural shifting, or hollow spaces. She found nothing specific, but she did find a few references to old geological surveys. They mentioned that the land in this region had once been home to underground streams many decades ago. Over time, those streams had dried up, leaving empty channels beneath the soil. Some of them had collapsed over the years, forming dips in remote areas. Other channels remained hidden, silent but present. This information made her heart tighten slightly. She knew that empty underground spaces could become unstable over time. If one of those hidden channels lay beneath Luke's pasture, it might explain the warm soil, the hollow sound, and the strange behavior of the animals. She closed the book gently and looked out the window toward Luke's ranch. She wished she could explain everything she felt, but she knew that warning him again would not be easy. He respected her, but he trusted his experience more, and he had put too much effort into the expansion to pause now without solid proof. Meanwhile, the workers kept making progress. They set fence posts deeper, cleared more overgrown areas, and moved equipment closer to the western edge. Everyone felt a sense of accomplishment as the project began taking shape. Luke stayed busy supervising, occasionally helping carry heavy materials or guiding the workers with precise instructions. Yet even he noticed the small signs that something was different. The soil in certain spots seemed softer than it should be. A few tools sank deeper than expected when left standing, and once, when the workers drove a post into the ground, they heard a hollow echo instead of the usual dense thud. They exchanged glances, confused, but Luke reassured them it was just a natural pocket in the soil. Every field had them. Still, he felt a small tug of uncertainty. He tried to ignore it, but it lingered quietly in the back of his mind. By the end of the week, the weather changed. A few clouds gathered in the sky, casting soft shadows over the fields. The breeze grew cooler, and the air carried the scent of moisture. Though it didn't rain, everything felt still, as if the land was waiting for something. That night, the rumbling grew slightly stronger. It wasn't loud enough to wake anyone fully, but it was unmistakable. The earth vibrated gently, like a slow heartbeat underneath the ranch. A few of the cattle stirred uneasily, shifting in their sleep. Luke woke up briefly, hearing a soft tremor through his window. He sat up, listened for a moment, and then shook his head. The sound went away quickly, replaced by peaceful silence. He didn't think much of it and went back to sleep, but Evelyn heard it clearly. She stood by her window in her nightgown, staring into the darkness with concern in her eyes. She didn't know when or how, but she felt certain that something hidden beneath the ground was preparing to reveal itself soon. The earth rarely sent so many signs without a reason. The next morning, she walked toward the western border again, wanting to observe the changes. The air felt heavy and slow. The ground beneath her feet seemed slightly lower than before, almost like a thin cushion of earth separated her from a deeper emptiness. As she walked, she thought about approaching Luke again. She didn't want to alarm him, but she felt responsible for at least trying. She rehearsed her words in her mind, hoping he would listen without dismissing her intuition. At the same time, Luke reviewed the progress with quiet satisfaction. The fencing looked strong, the clearing work was halfway done, and the workers planned to finish early the next week. Everything appeared on track, yet the land felt different beneath the calm surface. Evelyn's intuition grew sharper each day. Luke's determination held strong, even as faint doubts fluttered in his thoughts. The animals sensed the quiet shift and stayed clear of the changing soil. The ground itself seemed to whisper underneath it all. Something was waiting below, and soon, the land would no longer be able to keep its secret hidden. The morning of the incident began like any other, calm and almost too quiet. The sky glowed with a warm golden color, and the early light stretched across Luke's ranch, touching the fields gently. From a distance, everything looked peaceful and ordinary. The workers arrived as usual, greeting one another with easy smiles and relaxed conversations. No one had the faintest idea that this would be the day the entire town would talk about for years. Luke felt good about the progress made so far. He walked around the pasture, checking the fence lines and studying the areas where they still needed work. He liked to start early, before the workers began, because it allowed him to think clearly. Though he didn't admit it out loud, the subtle hints from the land had been on his mind the last few nights. The faint rumble he heard, the slightly loose soil those moments had stayed with him quietly. But each morning, when he saw the stable ground beneath his feet, his confidence returned. Evelyn, meanwhile, woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest. She couldn't explain it, but she felt as though the land had reached a point where it could no longer hide what was happening beneath the surface. She didn't know what the change would look like or when it would happen, but every sign she had been observing seemed to be building toward something. She looked out her window toward the direction of Luke's ranch and felt a quiet urgency rise in her. By mid-morning, Luke and his crew were preparing to finish digging the last few post holes near the western edge. This area was the exact spot Evelyn had warned him about, the place where the ground was warm, where there were cracks, and where the soil had felt hollow. The workers didn't notice anything unusual as they unpacked their tools and prepared to start their tasks. They chatted casually about the nice weather and the weekend plans ahead. The first sign came suddenly, but so quietly that no one reacted. One of the workers tapped a metal stake into the ground, and instead of the usual firm impact, it sank a little too easily. He frowned, pressed the stake again, and noticed the soil shift slightly around it. He looked at Luke, wanting to ask whether that was normal, but Luke was busy checking another part of the fence. Then came the sound, a deep, soft groan from the earth. It wasn't sharp or alarming. It was more like a long sigh, the kind a tired person makes after holding their breath too long. The workers paused and looked around, unsure of what they had heard. Luke straightened up, sensing the sound too. He rubbed his hands on his jeans and squinted toward the western line. "Did anyone else hear that?" one of the workers asked. "Probably the soil settling," another replied. "Happens sometimes." But even as he said it, he didn't sound certain. Evelyn, who had left her house earlier than usual, was already walking toward the pasture. Something had pulled her out the door. Something she couldn't ignore. When the distant groan reached her ears, she quickened her steps. She knew the land was giving its final warning. Luke approached the workers with a concerned look. He didn't want to alarm anyone, but he knew the ground had never made that sound before. He opened his mouth to speak, but then it happened. The earth trembled lightly at first, almost like a gentle vibration underfoot. The workers exchanged surprised glances, lifting their boots slightly as if checking whether the ground was truly shaking. Luke felt the movement clearly. It wasn't dangerous or strong, but it was very real. Everyone stood still for a moment, listening to the world around them. Then, without warning, the soil in front of them shifted. The ground dipped inward with a soft shudder, like a blanket being pulled down from beneath. The workers stepped back quickly, dropping their tools in surprise. The dip widened, creating a shallow curve in the land. Dust rose into the air in thin wisps, catching the sunlight in a strange, shimmering way. Luke's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't fully understand what he was witnessing. It wasn't a hole at first, just a slow sinking, as if the earth had lost its strength. Then the sinking deepened. The soil gave way more quickly, sliding downward and leaving an open gap. The posts they had planted tilted sharply, leaning into the opening. A few pieces of equipment rolled forward, slipping halfway into the forming hollow. One worker grabbed the end of a tool to stop it, but the tool disappeared into the dust before he could reach it. No one was in danger. Everyone had stepped back quickly enough. But the sight of the land collapsing so suddenly left them frozen in shock. Evelyn reached the fence at that exact moment. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched the earth reveal what it had been hiding. A large, dark hollow opened beneath the pasture, an underground cavern that had been silently waiting below for years, maybe decades. Soil continued falling into the opening, creating gentle thuds as it disappeared into the unseen space below. For several long seconds, everyone stood in complete silence. No one dared to move or speak. The dust lifted slowly, swirling in the warm morning air like a soft cloud. It felt unreal, like something that belonged in a story rather than the familiar ranch they walked every day. Luke stepped forward carefully, stopping a safe distance from the edge. His eyes widened as he looked at the deep cavity. It was larger than he could have imagined, much larger than anything he would have believed if someone had described it to him earlier. Evelyn approached him from behind, her steps soft but steady. Luke turned, and when he saw her, his expression changed. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was a deep realization, a mix of surprise, regret, and appreciation, all at once. "You were right," he said quietly, the words almost getting lost in the dusty breeze. Evelyn didn't smile. She didn't nod triumphantly. She simply looked at the opening in the earth with a calm, sad understanding. "The land was trying to tell us," she said softly. The workers gathered safely around, whispering in disbelief. Some of them shook their heads, others simply stared, trying to comprehend how such a large, empty space had existed beneath them. Within minutes, the rumbling stopped completely, and the land settled again. But the hole remained, a cold reminder of what had been hidden below. Word spread through the town faster than anyone expected. People arrived in groups, eyes wide, voices quiet. They walked up carefully, stopping several feet away from the sinkhole, whispering to one another about how something like this could happen. The familiar ranch, a place they had visited countless times, now held a secret no one had imagined. The quiet town was left speechless. Parents held their children's hands tighter as they approached the fenced-off area. Elderly ranchers murmured that they had never seen anything like it in all their years. The sheriff stood by, advising everyone to keep a safe distance. Reporters from a nearby town came to take notes and pictures. And through it all, Luke remained standing near the edge, his mind heavy with thoughts. He remembered every moment Evelyn had warned him. He remembered brushing off her concerns because he trusted his own experience. He remembered each strange sign he had ignored, the warm soil, the hollow sounds, the uneasy animals. Now he saw it all clearly. Evelyn stayed beside him quietly. Not to say, "I told you so," but because she understood the weight of the moment. She had never wanted to be right. She had only wanted the land to be understood. The collapse had caused no harm, but it had shaken the heart of the town. It changed the way people looked at their land, their instincts, and the warnings they sometimes ignored. The ground had spoken. And now, everyone listened. The news of Liam's decision spread through Cedar Valley like the breeze that carried the scent of pine every morning. People talked everywhere, at the cafe over warm cups of coffee, at the supply store while loading their trucks, even at the school where teachers whispered about the rancher who had finally agreed to listen. Yet no one knew what would happen next, and everyone waited with a mix of curiosity and quiet hope. They all knew the history between Liam and Clara, and they also knew how unusual it was for Liam to step back and reconsider his actions. Because of that, the entire town held its breath, wondering if this change would last or if the old rancher would return to his stubborn ways once the situation felt calm again. Clara spent the next few days reviewing reports and joining Liam on daily walks around the property. These walks were different from the tense ones before. Liam did not rush ahead, and he did not disagree with every suggestion she made. Instead, he listened carefully, asking questions when he didn't understand something, and taking notes in a small notebook he carried in his pocket. It surprised Clara, but she did not comment on it. She wanted him to grow at his own pace, not feel pressured by her expectations. One morning, while they were walking near the old fence on the eastern side of the ranch, Liam paused and looked across the wide land stretched before them. The sun was rising slowly, painting the sky with soft colors. He stood quietly for a moment, then said something Clara had never expected. "I think I understand now," he said in a calm voice. "It's not about being right or wrong. It's about making sure the land stays healthy for years." Clara felt a warmth in her chest. This was the first time Liam had spoken like this, and it meant more than he probably realized. She nodded gently. not wanting to break the fragile honesty that hung in the air. "You're doing well," she said. "You're learning faster than you think." Liam gave a small smile. The kind people show when they feel quietly proud. It was the kind of smile that made anyone around him feel hopeful. They continued their walk, both aware that a shift had taken place, even if unspoken. Soon the town noticed these changes too. A week later, Liam attended the monthly community meeting, something he had not done in almost 2 years. People turned around in their chairs when he walked in. Some raised their eyebrows in surprise, while others whispered to each other, wondering what had encouraged him to show up. Liam did not seem bothered by their reactions. He took a seat in the middle row and listened attentively as the meeting began. When the time came for community updates, Liam stood up slowly. The room grew silent. Everyone knew him as a quiet man who rarely spoke in public. Clara, who was seated near the front, turned slightly to look at him. Curious and a little nervous, Liam cleared his throat. "I want to speak about the changes happening at my ranch," he began. "There were problems I didn't take seriously before. But now, with Clara's guidance, we're working on a plan to protect the land." People exchanged surprised glances. No one expected him to acknowledge Clara openly or talk about cooperation so directly. "I realized something important," Liam continued. "When someone warns you, it's not always because they doubt you. Sometimes, it's because they want to help you see what you've missed." Clara felt her breath catch slightly. His words carried a sincerity she had not heard from him before. "I want to thank Clara," Liam said. "She didn't give up on the land, and she didn't give up on me." A soft murmur filled the room. Some nodded in agreement. Others simply stared, stunned by the transformation in the rancher they thought they knew so well. After the meeting, several townspeople approached Liam to express their support. They shared stories about similar challenges they had faced with their own land or work. Liam listened to each of them, offering polite responses and asking thoughtful questions. It was as if a door had opened inside him, a willingness to connect that had been locked away for years. Clara watched from a distance, feeling a quiet satisfaction grow within her. She had not done this for praise or recognition. She had done it because it mattered, because the land deserved care, and because people sometimes needed someone who believed in them enough to try again. The next month brought even more progress. Liam and Clara introduced new practices across the ranch. They added simple water channels to guide rainfall in safer directions. They planted native grasses in areas that needed more stability. They repaired old fences and added new markers to track soil changes. Every step was small, but together, they formed a stronger foundation for the ranch's future. One afternoon, as they worked near the western field, a light breeze rustled the tall grass. Liam glanced at Clara and said, "I never knew the land could teach me so much." Clara smiled. "It always has something to say. We just don't listen sometimes." Liam laughed softly. "You sound like my grandmother. She used to say that too." "I think she was right," Clara replied. Over time, the improvements to Liam's ranch became visible to everyone. The areas that once looked dry and stressed now appeared lively and full of color. The air around the ranch felt fresher, as if nature was responding with gratitude. Birds returned to places where they had not been seen in years. Even the creek, which had been thinner than usual, began to show signs of recovery. People in town began using Liam's ranch as an example when discussing land care. Some even visited to learn what changes he had made. Liam welcomed them, showing them around and explaining everything with patience. Clara often joined these tours, adding details and praising Liam for his dedication. One day, after a long week of work, Clara sat on the porch of the ranch house, enjoying the calm evening. The sky glowed with warm colors as the sun slowly lowered itself behind the hills. Liam stepped outside and joined her, carrying 2 glasses of cold lemonade. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the soft sounds of nature around them. "You know," Liam said after a moment, "I used to think asking for help meant I wasn't strong enough." Clara turned her head slightly. "A lot of people think that, but asking for help is its own kind of strength." Liam nodded slowly. She sipped her lemonade. I'm glad you do. Liam looked out across the land, his expression peaceful. Thank you for warning me, he said. And for not walking away. Clara smiled warmly. Thank you for listening. As the last light of evening faded, the two sat side by side in comfortable silence. No tension, no doubt, just mutual respect and quiet understanding. The ranch, once a source of worry and strain, now felt like a symbol of growth, patience, and shared effort. In the following months, life in Cedar Valley settled into a gentle rhythm. Liam continued to care for the land with new awareness. Clara returned often to check progress. But their relationship had shifted from advisor and rancher to something closer to genuine friends, who shared a deep appreciation for the world around them. People in town still talked about the moment Liam changed, about how he had once ignored a warning but eventually found the humility and wisdom to listen. They spoke of it not in judgment but as an inspiring reminder that it is never too late to grow, to change, or to see things differently. And every time Clara passed by the ranch, she felt grateful for the journey they had taken together. The land thrived, Liam had transformed, and the town had witnessed something meaningful, proof that guidance, patience, and understanding could bring about a change no one expected. In the end, Cedar Valley was left speechless, not because something dramatic happened, but because something deeply human did. A warning was heard. A stubborn heart softened, and through cooperation and trust, a rancher, a town, and a landscape found new life.